This is Devin Foley, CEO of Charlemagne Institute, and I'm very excited to have a presentation for you today that'll be with Paul Gottfried discussing cultural Marxism. And is it aptly named? What is it? Where did it come from? What are the impacts of it, and how we are seeing it play out, as well, of course, as how do we deal with this issue? So shortly, Paul will be joining us. He is the editor-in-chief of Chronicles Magazine. Chronicles Magazine, for those who don't know, is perhaps the best English-speaking magazine around, and you need to get a copy of it and subscribe. It's only $5 a month. You can do that on our website. Additionally, we will be fielding questions throughout the event. So if you are watching, we are live streaming on Intellectual Takeout's Facebook page, Chronicles Facebook page, as well as to the Charlemagne Institute YouTube channel. Post your questions there as we are discussing cultural Marxism. Or you can also email us at contact@Charlemagne Institute to get your questions answered, and I will do my best to work them into the conversation. Without further ado, let's turn it over to Paul Gottfried, a man who has been in the culture war and in the trenches fighting for longer than I've been alive, and I'm always honored to be able to join him and learn from him. He's a fantastic mind and a great hero for our cause. Paul, over to you. Tell us about cultural Marxism and what your views are and what you know.
Well, I think that this is this appearance on your program is sort of a coincidence, since I've been spending the last day writing a bibliography for a book on anti-fascism, most of which deals with cultural Marxism and with people whom we might describe as cultural Marxists, though they would probably balk at the description. I think one has to begin a discussion like this by pointing out that the term cultural Marxism may not be the most objective or the most unbiased way to describe what is the latest phase of the radical left, and the most successful in Western countries. Cultural Marxism, in German, Cultural Marxismus, was coined by actually people on the right who were describing the Frankfurt School, which was organized in Germany in the 1920s, and which became the creator for what today we call cultural Marxism. And the people in Germany, in Frankfurt in the 1920s, call themselves critical theorists, right? And they saw themselves blending Marxism, which is basically a socioeconomic system, not a very good one, but they're blending Marxism with their own interpretation of Freudian depth psychology. What I've argued in several of my books is the Marxism falls by the wayside, except for the fact that some of these people remain very soft on the Soviet Union and even become apologists for Stalin. And they do continue to talk about socialism. But the main thrust of their arguments and their political engagement becomes a reconstruction of bourgeois Christian society, because they become convinced that bourgeois Christian society leads to fascism. And the book which I've recently concluded in, which is now in press, is a study of anti-fascism from the 1920s on. And I think these critical theorists are very important because they redefine anti-fascism as they try to redefine Marxism as basically a struggle against what are seen as reactionary social cultural attitudes. For instance, the construction or the structuring of family around fixed gender roles is seen as bad because this leads to the suppression of women. It creates an authority structure that they don't approve of. They do not believe that children who grow up in these families can turn out to be anything but fascist. or what they would say are pseudo-democrats, because they really do not believe in equality and universalism. They become loyal to parents who are sort of totem figures in their cultural social universe. And the cultural Marxists are the people we call cultural Marxists. I don't know, critical theorists might be a more neutral term. These critical theorists become particularly important in the struggle against Nazism. In 1933, they leave Germany, and by 1934, they have reestablished what had been the Institute for Social Research. I keep thinking of the German, das Institut für Sozialforschung becomes the Institute for Social Research at Columbia University in 1934. And this becomes a major educational and cultural center in the United States. One of the most important achievements of this group is to turn out the authoritarian personality in 1950, which presents all their ideas on the destructive effect of, bourgeois Christian family life, and why this is going to lead to something similar to Nazism, although perhaps not quite as apocalyptic, but something very bad. And they also interpret America's struggle against the Soviet Union as something sort of driven by the authoritarian personality and by the irrational survival or the survival of an irrational family structure. And they try to use government in here in the United States, but even more in Germany. Once they have an occupation of a defeated Germany, they use their influence to try to reconstruct society. Now, they do have a profound, lasting influence on the Germans. It sort of explains why they become anti-fascist fascists today, or anti-Nazi Nazis. Uh, in the case of the United States, I think they have perhaps an even more long-lasting influence because most of them stay here. People like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and others go back to Germany, courtesy of the Allies, who see them as German re-educators. The others, unfortunately, stay here, and they totally invade the field of psychoanalysis, Freudian psychology. People that like Eric Fromm, who were very, very popular when I was growing up, were radical members of the radical school of critical theory. And they use their influence in psychology departments, education departments to transform America. One of their lasting achievements is the creation of the F scale. F scale stands for fascism. And the F scale test was used in government, civil service, education. Then it was somewhat revised, but then it continued to be used for many decades. And the purpose of that was to determine who had a fascist personality. Now, that was widely used in the United States. In fact, it was adopted as a standard test in California and some other states. And this, too, I think, reflects the continuing influence of the Frankfurt School. If you look at LGBT rights, um, anti racism, stuff like this, all of it does have its roots in the Frankfurt School and in its American offshoot, which becomes very important and then from the 1930s on. Um, but I think what today we call cultural Marxism, or for want of a better term, the imposition of political correctness, in the United States, has become in some ways more extreme. This is something I argue in my book. For instance, no one in the Frankfurt School believed that homosexuality was normal. They treated it as deviant behavior. It is only in the United States and other Western countries today that gay marriage is proclaimed as a blessing or something that we should endorse. This would have seemed absolutely insane to the critical theorists of an earlier generation. They also generally accepted gender roles. They didn't think men and women were interchangeable to the degree to which we've carried it. Nonetheless, I think they are a precursor of the kind of political culture that we're living in at the present hour.
Oh, that's fascinating. And, it seems to me that we are seeing this philosophy or ideology. It has its tentacles almost everywhere, whether it be HR, corporate departments, government, obviously in education and both higher ed and lower, but you also see it through the entertainment industry and the news and all of the rest. How and why was it able to spread so rapidly and to essentially topple the existing order? How is it that just a few people coming over, landing at Columbia in the 1930s, pulled this off?
Yeah, I think the reason they pull it off is that they just influence many people. They're in pivotal positions in an earlier time in American history when it was easier to do this. You know, um, there weren't that many Columbia universities. If you were in New York and you could sort of get a corner on the field of psychoanalysis, in the 1940s, 1950s. This put you in a powerful position. They also become re-educators in Germany because they're writing the official interpretations. Why did the Germans become Nazis? And of course, the answer is these bourgeois Christian institutions that we're going to have to restructure for everybody. Um, and another argument, which I think it's Christopher Lasch who makes very well in one of his books, the one and only, the one true heaven, is this big tome that he produces with Norton um, back in the 1970s. Lasch makes the argument all of these ideas become mainstream in the United States because they're not really seen as radical, except by people who are viewed as extreme right wingers, like some right wing senator might get up and denounce this as communism, or somebody like Senator Helms might be against it. So this becomes associated. The opposition to this becomes associated with, sort of backward thinking, obscurantist Americans from, I suppose, the then equivalent to flyover country. So some of the people who buy into this, like Seymour Morton Lipset, are, a cutting edge sociologist. And Lipset thinks the authoritarian personality is a great work. And the authoritarian personality is published by the American Jewish Committee, which at the same time begins to publish Commentary Magazine, which was a pro-Jewish, liberal, anti-communist magazine in the 1950s. So these Frankfurt School theories are really become sort of associated with a kind of mainstream progressive view in the United States. The radicalism is sort of not really, I think, understood. And they also have tremendous influence on social psychology. They get into all these fields of psychology. They're called upon to socialize and sensitize corporations, and it doesn't. It's not just happening now. It was happening back in the reactionary right wing McCarthyite 1950s as well, which were not as conservative as people now believe, or as right wing as people believe. So they really have their fingers in a number of different pies at the same time.
When you look at cultural Marxism and you start to grapple with it, there is, let's just say on family life, we are now at a place where the idea of sex is tossed out, the idea of race is tossed out. None of these things that we see with our own eyes, these differences, are real. They're all, essentially, it's gender, it's one's identity, it's one's personal truth. How does this relate to the rise of postmodernism? Do they go hand in hand? Does this rejection of sort of objective truth and reason, being able to parse things apart and determine truth, is cultural Marxism or critical theory, is that essentially the vanguard of postmodernism? How does it work? What's the relationship? Is there
Well,
one?
yeah, I think it's a more complex relationship. Not all postmodernism leads in this direction. I think you can speak of right-wing postmodernism. There's a very good book by Mr. Russello, who also writes for us, Joe Russello, a book on Russell Kirk as a man of the postmodernist right. There is a postmodernist right. There are people who really question the assumptions of the Enlightenment from the right, not from the left. They're critical of rationalism. They see it as being socially destructive. Um, uh, this, this is not just a leftist belief. It sort of starts on the right. I noticed that one of the criticisms that neoconservatives have made of postmodernism is that I see it as being somehow linked to fascism or linked to the right or something like this. Well, that's not entirely untrue. There is right wing postmodernism. But I think what you get with the Frankfurt School and the critical theorist is left wing postmodernism. They buy into a form of postmodernism that is destructive of the family, destructive of traditional social institutions. And what is usually taught as postmodernism in college is informed by these attitudes, right? Like, if somebody were to ask me, am I a postmodernist? I suppose I am in a certain sense because I'm critical of some aspects of the Enlightenment. And I think even, the counter revolutionaries in Europe sometimes made very good points. On the other hand, I would totally reject what's taught as postmodernism in universities. So my answer would be that what happens is that you get a fusion of this cultural Marxism and postmodernism. So they become indistinguishable in the end. If you're teaching one, you're teaching the other.
Absolutely. No, and that's fascinating. As far as, people are rightfully bewildered by this, the how it shows up in all manner of their life, in the schools, and what's being taught. Is there one? And if so, what is the sort of guiding principles of critical theory? If we look at Marxism, it
Mhm.
was a critique of class and, as you say, socioeconomics and material well-being.
Mhm.
This new monster that we're dealing with doesn't seem to be oriented towards class or even socioeconomic side right out of the gate. It seems to be oriented to who has power, who has less power, and that transfer. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think they're not only concerned with the question of who has power, but with the culpability of those who have power. That whoever you see in a position of power, unless they buy into the victim cult, which is inherent in the what I call the post-Marxist left, which is all about gender and whatever it is, race and so forth. Unless you buy into this stuff, you're part of the problem. Um, Now, the question is, are they really against the powerful? And, I think there's something to be said for an argument that I know Pedro Gonzalez and I and others have made that no, I mean, they represent the people in power right now. They represent woke capitalists, the political class, the deep state. I mean, they're all behind the same movement. Or at least they're in alliance with it. So there's only certain people who are in power that they go after. And the answer is they go after normal people. What you really have is almost a cult of abnormality. The assumption is that all normal people are guilty of fascism, racism, sexism, and are living in an oppressive authority structure. The oppressive authority structure is what they take from the critical theory. This is an oppressive, and the reason is that your attitudes and your culture are bad. Okay, so it's not really socioeconomic anymore. I mean, they do try to pretend they're Marxist occasionally, but the Marxism in socialism is almost sort of like icing on the cake. What they really don't like, as I said, are normal people, because normal people are really the sick people, and they're making other people suffer. And these normal people have been bad for a very long time, maybe since the dawn of history, because white people who live in heterosexual relations and in families, particularly the ones who became Christian at some point, Muslims obviously are better because they're anti-Christian, or they're viewed that way as anti-Christian, or whoever's viewed as anti-Christian has sort of a leg up in this, or whoever's anti-white has a leg up. So I think really at the end of the day, what holds these people together, even more, well, it was present in critical theory, but it's even more present here, is hate. They hate normal people, and they hate their history, and they attribute to them a guilt, a disproportionate guilt for things that nobody else is ever to blame for, right? I mean, it's how did slaves get here? I think this is the point that Karl Horowitz was making to us, that they were sold by blacks to other people. They finally came here, and those who were descended from slaves generally have lived a lot better than Africans have, which does not justify the slavery. But then you have to you have to see these things in context. And then everybody else had slaves and treated them much, much worse. So why are only Western white people to blame? And why am I to blame for slavery when none of my ancestors, as far as I know, ever had a slave? Well, the answer, of course, is you're white, and white people, by definition, are to be hated. And of course, there's room for white people in the system too, because they can hate other people. If you're a homosexual, you can hate heterosexuals. If you're a woman, you can hate men. So I think at the end of the day, hate is the thing which keeps all of this stuff going, and a desire to destroy. That's why in that article I said these people do remind me of Nazis, because the Nazis were like apocalyptic haters. Um, the Marxists at least had some kind of vision, some kind of alternative vision. It may have turned into hell in the end, but they do have some vision of everybody living equally in a society, where everybody is served according to their needs. Or this, these people basically want to destroy everybody else. And there's nothing but hate driving. Now, this is present in the Frankfurt School too, because they also resent white bourgeois Christians, or they don't have whites, they're not talking about race, but they resent bourgeois Christians whom they see as authoritarian and dangerous and fascist prone. They can create a fascist society. Uh, but they were not quite um, uh, as apocalyptic and as thoroughgoing in their hatred as you see on the what I call the post-Marxist left. These people are absolutely extreme haters. Now, I don't think this may not be true of government operatives who are allied with them in the FBI or someplace else. I think um, some of their allies are just in there to get back power. A lot of people backing Biden right now do not necessarily share these beliefs, but they see Black Lives Matter, or they see the crazies, as being their path to take back power from Trump, like these never Trump Republicans and so forth. But the people who really embrace this post-Marxist leftist ideology seem more and more driven by hate against normal people.
It's fascinating. In many ways, you see how the philosophy plays out in the real world. And it seems to me that, all of the talk of, well, that's my truth, that there is this belief that the human person is infinitely malleable, and that it is the rest of the world that needs to change. The structures need to change. And that seems to go quite along with the idea of hating. In almost some ways, it's an odd self-hatred that you would want everything to change, that reminds you of your differences with, compared to the majority of people, and sort of societal norms and all of that. Would that be accurate? And then does that explain the rampant narcissism that we're also seeing? You see these videos of a teenage girl looking into her phone while she's driving, and it's unsettling, to say the least. But it is almost this idea that I am the thing, that anything that bothers me must change.
No, I think that's absolutely true. But they really don't want to change anybody outside of white Western Christian society. Like They have no interest in changing Africans. They have no interest in changing Hindus. Certainly not Muslims. They'll apologize for them when they shoot Christians or Jews or somebody else. It's perfectly fine. Um, it's only Western people who are bad. Like, other people can have slaves. It's perfectly okay. Again, and they can practice sexism and circumcise women and do anything they want. It is only Western people who are uniquely evil. So, they really, the transformation is only going to be focused on the West. And you're right. I mean, any identity we have it must be changed if we belong to groups who are now being condemned. Um, there is an interesting concept that comes from Eric Voegelin, but it's not original to him, the German historian of philosophy, about most. Voegelin argued that most ideologies are religious heresies of one kind or another, usually Christian heresies. Um, I think he understood that most ideologies sort of belong to the left because they're based on total transformation. But he argues more specifically that the ancient Christian heresy, which had earlier been rejected by the Jews, called Gnosticism, is always sort of coming back in different ways. And, one can laugh at this. I don't. I think he's right. I think ideologies are religious heresies, usually Christian heresies, and something like Gnosticism seems to underlie most of them. And the most extreme form is the current left, in which, like the ancient Gnostics, you believe that the world as it exists is totally evil, or at least the Western world. It is totally depraved. It cannot be saved. It must be removed. Now, the Gnostics believed that God would transform this world. It would be totally changed. We have to just wait for this to happen. And those who are among the elect understand inwardly that this is going to happen, and they are preparing themselves for this change. I think what you have here is this notion of a transformational myth, that everything that now exists, at least in the West, is evil. And it's going to be changed, if not by divine providence, then by, I don't know, historical forces, or by the will, of those who recognize it's so evil. But you have to pull down all these statues. Why? Because all these statues commemorate evil people who are part of this, the evil world, which the Gnostics see as the work of the devil. So all this will have to be pulled down, and then we'll be totally transformed in the end. Of course, we'll bring this about ourselves. One of the ways you do this is by allowing the Western world to be overrun by non-Westerners, bringing other religions and cultures, which aren't politically correct, but they're not Western, which makes them ipso facto good. So this is why I think they love immigration so much, particularly from totally exotic cultures. Why would I believe that diversity is strength? I would think that groups that are unified, right, that have the same religious, cultural, moral beliefs are going to do a lot better. Well, the answer is that the people who are living here now are bad. So we have to have diversity in order to transform the society.
As you describe this, it seems to be, and I do definitely agree with very much what you've said, and this hatred of the West and hatred of Christianity. I mean, at the end of the day, are we essentially dealing with a heresy? Currently modernism is the heresy that is demolishing the Catholic Church during this time and ripping it apart. But is this an emotional hatred of those around, of the West, of Christianity, and then building the intellectual justifications to make it take place? That it's not rooted in a reality that it exists. And if
Right.
you're if it's what you say is true, if it's rooted in a hatred of Christianity in the West, then it seems there is no inherent logic to it. It is merely trying to intellectually justify the destruction.
Yeah, that's true. I have noticed that people who attend Catholic parochial schools and then don't like those schools become extremely. I think this fellow, what's his name, Bill Mayer or Bill Maher, the one who's like constantly ranting against the church. He rants against everything, and he went crazy attacking that poor lady, which Amy Barrett. What a horrible woman, calling her names of all kinds and so forth. Um, People who at one time would say, I went to the school, I didn't much like it, I don't go to church anymore, something like that, now take these kind of frenzied attitudes. We have to destroy civilization. Um, or somebody who comes from a family where they use the N word or something like that, they go crazy. I mean, when I grew, who cares? But there is this frenzied reaction, and it's a moral reaction because these people deeply believe that any attempt to defend Western society as it has existed up until now um, is an essentially evil act. And the reaction against things that people didn't much care about in the past, or just in some adult fashion simply accepted as part of life, is so insane. Like, people finding things to complain about. That I went to this skating rink and there was only one black person or one woman or something. And then this becomes like a major issue. As a college professor for many years, I noticed this. And, I remember there was at one college in which I taught, there was a person who was gay who made a big fuss of this and had fights with other kids. Well, the fact that somebody insulted him became like a major scandal. The fact that he insulted everybody else didn't matter, of course. But it is a sort of overreaction to anybody who hurts or in any way offends a designated victim group, a designated victim of Western civilization, of course. Because if this person had suffered in a Muslim society, nobody would much care. There's this lady I see her on TV, who is, I think she's a Somali who became a feminist and rejected the Muslims. And she's now being attacked regularly by the Southern Poverty Law Center, although I assume she's a left winger and a feminist because she attacks Muslims. This makes her a hater or something like that. So anyone who hates a designated victim or anyone who is seen as representing reactionary attitudes, Western attitudes, others are fine, um, will uh, usually be condemned, violently condemned. Um, one of the things I keep asking myself is, why are Black Lives Matter allowed to be black racist and terrorist, but that we're screaming at the Proud Boys who are racially integrated, as far as I know, and all they're doing is defending some monuments. Everybody has to go around saying they're a major part of the problem. And I know Lindsey Graham said they're terribly dangerous white racists, which they certainly are not. But I mean, it is the disproportion or the asymmetry. This, if we agree that racism is bad, fine. Then why are we not allowed to say that all lives matter? Well, the answer is nobody really believes that all racism is bad. Just white people are bad. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah, you see that, one of the things that's popping up now is that Black Americans are incapable of being racists
Mhm.
because they lack power. And it's only really white people who, de facto are racist, even if they don't realize they're racist with that. Now, how does the rhetoric about equality and equity play into all of this? You look at Plato writing about democratic man, and he warns that, a
Mhm.
democratic society can eventually get to the point where it's drunk on the sort of liberty and equality
Mhm.
idea,
Mhm.
and it quickly just spirals out of control, and unfortunately, of course, ends with tyranny. So what is that relationship? If something's built on hatred, and logically we see that they aren't really seeking equality, what why so much emphasis on that? Is that just a cover, or is there a relationship between the, cultural Marxism, critical theory, and the egalitarian spirit?
Yeah, all culture is critical theorists also spoke about equality in a qualified sense. It meant people who have been socially reconstructed by them. You have to reconstruct them. So equality was something that was not just material. It also required for its achievement the re-education of people. So I think this is certainly, I think, an aspect of the current drunken obsession with equality, right? That we can only have equality if we have an equal playing field, and if all races are made to feel equally good about themselves. Of course, this is not what's happening. Whites are supposed to feel lousy about themselves, and other people you have to sort of raise. We also, push ridiculous ideas that have been disproved 1,000 times in order to make this argument. For instance, saying that black people have very low self-esteem. There is no evidence of that. White people have very high self-esteem. Some do and some don't. Asians who do very well academically do not seem to have particularly high self-esteem, from what from what psychologists have told me. um, so there really is no correlation between high or low self-esteem, and doing well socioeconomically. I suppose you need some, but there's no evidence that blacks do not do as well because they have low self-esteem, and whites have higher self-esteem. But that argument gets trotted out nonetheless because it can be used to justify further social engineering. Um, the the idea of equality is always one which is held up as an ideal, but not one that is being realized in our society. I think for a while the left were happy. Like, remember when Obama was president in the United States, because whatever he did was taking us down the path to equality, racial equality, social justice, whatever. I think the election of Donald Trump had an absolutely traumatic effect on these same people. Doing this book on anti-fascism, I was telling my wife there's like hundreds of books that I keep coming across, some self-published, on why Trump is a fascist or why Trump is at least as bad as Hitler, probably even worse. And these come from Yale professors. you know. I mean, they seem to be totally traumatized by the fact that they're late. They couldn't keep up their radical reconstruction or whatever they thought they were doing under Obama. But I think this has had an absolutely traumatizing effect here and in other Western European countries, because I read French and German and Italian. Italians not so much. The French and Germans are totally convinced that Trump is bringing a new Hitlerian age to us, or we have to get rid of him as soon as possible. I'm not quite sure why there is this anti-Trump hysteria. I mean, why do they care so much? um, I don't think he is any more socially right wing than maybe Bill Clinton or somebody before Obama. um, he is not pushing us toward the far right in anything, as far as I can see. But there does seem to be just constant accelerating hysteria about him, and I'm not quite. I really don't have all the answers. The degree, the intensity of this hysteria leaves me just puzzled.
It seems to me that what Trump has done is created an existential crisis for them. It seems that, if you look at how they go about the fight, the goal is to keep people divided and scared. It's the way critical theory or cultural Marxism shows up in the real world for most Americans is, you go to work, all of a sudden HR is telling you have different rules. You're, doing something over, just shopping, and now you're getting messaging, and your kids are getting, an education, and it pops up and it's cloaked in, well, don't we want all people to be equal and things of that nature? But I think that, in some ways what Trump did is show middle America that they still have fight, that they still have power, and that it's okay to love America, to love your family, and to want the best for the country. It seems, when you're looking at these people, I look at, what's taking place out CHOP in Seattle and Portland. These people only seem to be energized and happy if they are destroying.
Mhm.
It doesn't strike me that these are builders. They are destroyers in many ways. Um, and when we look at it, what is the trajectory of this? Let us say if the postmodernists, cultural Marxists have their way and they tear it all down. It doesn't seem like that era will last very long because it's sheer chaos. Uh, what do you see as far as its future trajectory, hold on America, and what it ultimately wants to do?
Well, I think you're right about the long-term effect, which will be anarcho-tyranny, which we already have. um, but at least in the short or middle term, they can muddle through. And I look at European countries like France or Germany, which, for all intents and purposes, are ruled by cultural Marxists, and they do function up to a point. The problem is they're also being overwhelmed by Muslims and others who are coming in who have a lot of influence, and the kinds of a socially disintegrative educational system which we see here is even more true in a country like Germany. Spend all their time hating their history, renaming things, pulling down, and of course, we have slavery, they have Nazism, I suppose, which in effect was much much worse. So they have something they can associate, their past with that's bad. But this only lasts, I think, up to a certain point when all order is going to break down. If you fill up your country with young male Muslims, um, or third world populations that cannot be integrated into their society, it will have cultural and social effects that you will not be able, particularly when the indigenous population is being taught to hate themselves, to hate their culture. Um, which has not put them in a very good fighting position or defensive position against these incomers, the ones who are coming in. In America, what we've done is simply divide up races. We told the white race they're worthless, and the blacks are victims. And if you want to, burn down some towns, just go ahead, which is what I'm seeing. This, and we're even going to reward you by, putting the party that encouraged you to burn down towns into power. If the Democrats win. So they get rewarded for doing this. This kind of system only works, as I said, in the short or middle term. It's going to break down. You need to have people who have some sense of their past, their history. You need homogeneity. I mean, it was, I think Rousseau is closer to the truth than the diversity people. And unlike other people on the right, I think the social contract has many important lessons to teach us. The most important of which is that homogeneity is the basis for self government, that you need people who agree on first principles. I think it was Wilmore Kendall who made that point, but then he also found that in Rousseau. um, you cannot have people who hate their own past, and just beg other people to come in and destroy their culture and their society. So I don't think this system can work in the long term. The ones who are going to sustain the system in the short and middle term are the deep state, the neoconservatives, never Trump Republic. I mean, these people think they can just go running on run the society, and in alliance with the left, and they'll be able to control the crazies. um, Good luck. I mean, I don't know how they're going to do it very long, because there's too many of those crazies. And the educational system is in the hands of crazies. So I don't know exactly how the moderate elements, even the ones with the money and political power right now, are going to last in the long run.
How do we fight it then? To your everyday person who may be, viewing this or listening to it, in this discussion, and this is with Dr. Paul Gottfried, the editor-in-chief of Chronicles, for those who are joining us late, a
Yeah.
phenomenal mind and a man who's been fighting the culture war for decades and decades and decades. So, Paul, how do we push back? I mean, it seems that for those of us who are on the front lines of the culture war, we cannot fear being called a racist, a homophobe, all of these things. We have to, know who I am and how I treat people and view people. And you have to rest on that, knowing that these allegations or attacks against you are totally false. But your everyday individuals now dealing with, diversity training at work, and companies are starting to require people to list their pronouns on their emails, their work email. How does the normal everyday person deal with this?
I think there's a problem that I noticed yesterday when I after reviewing a book for a leading academic press, I was then asked, would I like to get these books free of charge as in return for my fine evaluation? And every book that I looked at was about lesbians, homosexuals, oppressed blacks. I mean, it was like 300 books. They were all the same. And I said, no, I will forego this reward. I wouldn't even want these books in my house. You turn on a television program, HBO, features one victimology program after the other. So we really are being absolutely inundated with this from all sides. Um, I think some of it does lose its effect, the same way as growing up in a communist country did. That if you're getting communist propaganda all the time, you don't believe this after a while. I have a nephew who works for a large. He's a tax attorney, and he says, the corporations do this. He doesn't believe any of it. He's going to vote for Trump. He's actually going for to work there. Some of this doesn't. It's just too much of it. But it does have its effect. Like, I mean, people are hysterical about COVID in the United States. Most people think lockdowns and they're great. And a German friend sent me this from Europe, and it's like just about every Western European country wants lockdowns. It's the majorities are terrified. So, in a critical situation, these people can be very, very powerful. Uh, there are two things that I would advise, though. One, make sure Democrats don't win elections. Just about any Republican, even Romney, is better than a Democrat. And I say this having profound disgust for most of these rhinos, but the Democrats can just do a lot more harm right now. They really have been radicalized. And, you can even look at Klobuchar or other so called moderate Democrats. They're radical, do whatever the radicals do, the same as Biden will. There's no difference.
Well,
So you
yeah,
just want
we're seeing that here in Minnesota, which is
right.
fascinating. Where, the big thing to watch really in Minnesota this year is what's called the Iron Range, which is
Mhm.
the northeast
Right.
quarter, if you would, of Minnesota that has long been dominated by, blue dog Democrats, as they're sometimes called, where it's these are union, strong backers of
Mhm.
labor, strong backers
Mhm.
of a social safety net. At the same time, these are people who find that the new radicalism and the environmentalism and things of that nature is destroying their ability to make a living up there. That all of these labor individuals are finding that the radicals in the Twin Cities are dictating terms that they simply can't live with, literally can't survive with. And so there's a hope there, as you point out, to that. The in a previous conversation that we had on fascism, You had made the point that it was really, when you look at Spain and the rise of Franco, or, in Italy, that it was the middle class who wanted order restored. Is that a dangerous trajectory that we are on as well? That as the social chaos intensifies, as people are seeing their towns burned, their buildings demolished, or looking at Portland, which is on, I don't know, day 130 of Antifa sieging, the federal building and the federal judiciary building and other things, is a backlash possible that goes well beyond simply trying to restore constitutional order, but that seeks order at all cost?
Yeah, this is a point that people are always raising to me, and my answer is just bring it on. At this point, I'd be delighted. If some man of order or somebody arose and would deal with address these problems. What I see is something else that could happen, which is that this middle class, in the end, will vote for the people who are, behind the riots, hoping they'll make them stop. And that's a possibility that if I vote for these Democrats who are causing the riots, they'll make them stop the next day. If I vote for the Republicans, they'll just keep going on, right? So that's what I really fear. I think the middle class in America is sufficiently corrupt in some ways, so that they might take that position rather than look for some right wing man of order. I also know where this right wing man of order will come. Certainly not of the military. If you look at the military command, they've been made politically correct. They've been, you know, ideologically emasculated or something like that. And they also give these soldiers and people working in government these lessons in critical theory and political correctness. And so I don't think we can count on the military being involved in a right wing coup in the United States. I was hoping when these riots were going on that the middle class would become sufficiently disgusted so they would all, go over to Trump. One problem that we have is that college educated white women, not only black, but white women, have been radicalized. These so called suburban women, the soccer moms, and so forth. I don't know exactly what it's going to take to de radicalize them at this time. People who have not gone to college, certainly white people who have not gone to college, tend to be politically further right. The college does seem to be, have a pernicious effect, particularly on women who major in, I don't know, gender studies, English, or sociology, or social work, or something like that. Um, and I think we'll be contending with that problem for a long time.
Some of Trump's campaign and others are raising the issue in the last month, really, of the idea that I believe was floated by the Obama administration and tried to be implemented at some points. Whereas, currently Section 8 housing is generally isolated and oftentimes in the urban core. But this idea that sort of the suburbs need to be colonized in order to, again, get rid of anything that seems normal or orderly. And that there are ideas of providing, essentially turning every fourth or fifth house in a suburban neighborhood into a Section 8 house. What do you see that having traction with these suburban moms? It seems that, they're seeking comfort and they may vote for certain things, but at the end of the day, they don't want their life disturbed. They want to be able to drive a nice car, hit Starbucks, come home to a nice house, watch TV, drink the wine, and do it all over again the next day. So, do you see efforts to try and rattle suburban women as effective? Or are they mostly so far radicalized that they would prefer to virtue signal instead of worrying that their neighborhood may be burned and looted or every fifth house becomes Section 8 housing?
I would say, although this is not a conclusive scientific uh, kind of poll I've been doing, I would say that those who fit the description of suburban women that you've given um, do not seem at this moment to be rattled at all by the prospect of having this the inner city brought into their suburbs and moved in. A, because they have not yet seen this happen, and it doesn't seem that these suburban women were very much moved by what Tucker Carlson calls the Biden voters protesting, burning down cities. I don't know how many of them have changed their political allegiance on the basis of that. Probably most of these things never got out into the suburbs far enough to affect that demographic. But that is a good question. I mean, what would happen if the Democrats really decided to scatter inner city housing in plush suburbs? Would the soccer moms become concerned enough to vote to change their political allegiance?
Would you be able to speak to, on that, this idea that, well, these changes are taking place, but they won't really affect me so long as I, virtue signal sufficiently and, wave the rainbow flag and all of that. But can you speak to the nature of cultural Marxism? And it's essentially what I would argue is a totalitarian nature to it, that there is not there are no stones that won't be left unturned. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that in fact is the link that cultural Marxism shares with, let's say, Marxist Leninism. That they speak about both equality, they speak about equality, but have to create a totalitarian society in order to achieve their ideal of equality. I mean, and that, as a matter of fact, I think is a characteristic of the left generally. Of any group on the left. In the end of the day, is totalitarian because they want to change human nature and want to equalize us in some radical way. Um, yeah, I think they're going to go on pushing. I think they're going to go on pushing in that direction. And I think these government experts do to some extent believe in equality, manipulating people, thinking that people are infinitely malleable. But they also bring with them this absolutely bottomless hatred, for white Christian bourgeois society. I think that's there. Um, I think the hysteria with which they've gone after that poor lady, that Judge Barrett, indicates where they stand on these issues. I mean, they sound like Nazis describing Jews or something. They're absolutely crazy. But I think hatred is a critical element of what drives the left.
In a culture war, of course, whoever forms the children really makes the future in many ways. And we know that cultural Marxists dominate education at all levels in this country, as well as entertainment and other things. It seems that if we were to advise parents out there on what they can do, a lot of people ask, well, what can I do? It seems almost as if advising them, turn off the TV, cut the cable cord, seek out an education for your children that is not being shaped by this. Seek out the classical education model, private schools that do that, or homeschooling, or other opportunities. Would you agree with those things? And are there other things that parents can do?
I agree with everything you said. The effects of this cultural Marxist, or whatever you want to call it, intersectional leftist domination of our society, is there's less and less of popular culture that is not affected by it. And this is something I've noticed. Say, well, I'll watch television, and I'll see some old movie. But then before you get to see the movie, you have to listen to a lecture on racism, sexism, homophobia, and all the rest. I mean, it's worse than any communist guy. I mean, it's just like constant. And then you say, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to watch a sports event. Well, then you also get lectured. You see a Black Lives Matter sign in there. So I think that at the end of the day, if you don't want your kids to be affected, you're going to have to isolate them from all of this stuff. And I think parents are simply going to have to take a much more active role in steering their kids in the right direction. You cannot depend on institutions to do this any longer. I mean, unless they're carefully picked. This one is still okay. My friends run this school, or there's decent people. But the cultural pollution comes from just about every direction. A young friend of mine, David Azarad, who um, I think has been on Tucker Carlson a few times. He wrote a column. I think must have been in Real Clear Politics or somewhere. But you cannot remove the voice of the left. It's coming at you from every single direction. That's the one thing you noticed. I mean, it's unbelievable. And as I told them, what you get here, you get in England, in France, in Germany, and other places, Canada certainly. So I think parents have to be extremely careful about the influences to which. So at a certain point, it may not matter because by then the children will be on guard against the same things that we're on guard against. They know that they'll know they're being lied to.
It's a tough task for parents, and essentially we are, in doing that, asking parents to make significant sacrifices. That you may not be able to have 2 new cars in the driveway and live in the best, suburban neighborhood or the newest suburban neighborhood. But it is a sacrifice that seems to me quite worthy of your time and the biggest way that you could make a difference. We are coming up on the top of the hour for the program and need to wrap up. But Paul, we've had a few questions about what recommended reading that you would offer to people. Any books that are out there that, that a normal Joe can access and get into, not digging through, John Rawls or something like that.
Books that address this cultural crisis, beside my own, and I have written a whole bunch of books, like one on multiculturalism, another one on the post-Marxist left. There's a very good book by Douglas Murray that I recommend, which is it's sort of like the end of Europe, and he's showing you the way the cultural left has taken over and destroyed Europe, and was also responsible for the Islamicization of European cities now. But it's more accessible than my books because I think he comes from a journalistic background and is able to present issues in a relatively simple fashion. There's another book by Christopher Caldwell on the same subject. Caldwell has written several good books on this, but he has one that sort of looks at Western societies and sees the degrees to which the cultural left has just taken over. And I recommend these books. I also recommend my own books on the subject, but I said these books are probably more accessible to general readers.
Well, in your books, are there specific titles that folks can jot down if they're listening or viewing this?
Yeah, there's one called Multiculturalism and the Politics of Guilt. There is another one on European Marxism. It's called The European Left in the New Millennium. It was published right after the beginning of the century. I would recommend both of them. My book on anti-fascism just goes through the whole schmear from the 1920s on, and it deals with the cultural Marxist and it deals with contemporary society mostly. But that won't be out for a while. But these other books I recommended are extremely good, and there's a lot of work done by European scholars on these, but their books are generally not accessible in English.
Very good. Well, thank you, Paul. I think that was a illuminating discussion, and one that I do hope people take to heart, that if it's true that what we are up against is driven primarily or deep down by hatred, that is destructive, and it will not stop at anything. And it's a totalitarian ideology that we are dealing with. And it's going to require courage, a lot of courage for people to be able to stand up. It's also going to require sacrifice for parents and families to shield their children and to be able to raise up a new generation that can fight this. As far as topic or books to be able to read, the only thing I would recommend as well is a subscription to Chronicles magazine. It is fantastic, and it covers a lot of this. And I know, every time I say that, but truly, for $5 a month, you can get the wisdom of Paul Gottfried and numerous other scholars and writers who are just simply brilliant, quite honestly. And you will come away with your mind fed and a much deeper understanding of our history, of the philosophies and beliefs that are at play, as well as coming to see what you can do. So with that, Paul, thank you so very much for joining us today. It is always a delight. I just the unfathomable depths of your knowledge and mind are always on display, so I enjoy it. And thank you all who joined us for this live stream, and thank you too for those who are listening to this or viewing it down the road. We do hope that you like our pages, sign up for our emails, and of course, get yourself a subscription to Chronicles Magazine. Otherwise, we will see you again next week. Thank you.